a space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
Welcome to A Space to Speak Your Mind,
a radio programme and podcast about mental health and wellbeing, made by people with lived experience, part of a wellbeing group run by Cornwall Mind.
We do occasionally cover subjects that some listeners may find distressing.
For more information, help and support, please visit cornwallmind.org.
I'm Gaelle.
I'm Abi.
And we're presenting this month's show.
Coming up on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about the resources that we find useful when we're struggling in life, such as books and podcasts. But first, let's hear from Rose and Joe from Cornwall Mind.
A space to speak your mind.
My name's Abi, and here today in the studio from Cornwall Mind's Lived Experience Network, I've got Rose and Joe. Hello, welcome to the studio.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Hello.
First of all, could you tell us just a little bit about what the Lived Experience Network is?
So the Lived Experience Network is a group of individuals who all have experience of using Cornwall's mental health services, and we say that that's lived experience. And they're a network of individuals who want to use this experience to improve Cornwall Mind's mental health services. So going into places like the NHS, telling people about what they experienced and sharing that so that the experience of other people in the future can be improved.
Thank you. I just wonder if you could explain the term experts by experience.
So maybe I can break that down and explain the structure or the role of experts by experience. And I don't put that in quotation marks because it's not true that they're experts. I put it in quotation marks because it is a term that is used generally and that's kind of had consensus and been agreed upon at a high level across the country for people with lived experience who are doing this kind of work. So people with lived experience going into the council or going into the NHS and sharing their experience. So to develop projects called or are often termed experts by experience. And that is because there may be a panel of experts there, doctors, social workers, nurses, who all have expertise in their field. However, the voices that we are amplifying and empowering are those who are actually experts in what's happening on the ground, experts by experiencing what it is like to have a mental health condition and to be treated or seek support for that. And they've gained those expertise and they may know so much about the system that those professionals standing there in the room or sitting there in the room don't realise. Simple things like, for example, I was listening to a podcast the other day that used the example of actually a waiting room for a mental health service was so bare and so bland and the seats were so uncomfortable that anyone who was anxious or sweaty would just be increasingly uncomfortable as they were sat on them, and they were all different colours and all different, and the waiting room itself was hidden behind doors, and so the whole experience of trying to find the place to go for your mental health assessment was extremely stressful and quite uncomfortable, and that sets people back in their stead. And the clinicians, when they were looking at improving this service, would never have thought of the waiting room. They were looking at targets and times and how we do this and how we do that, and they were like, well, for a start, could you put some water in the waiting room so that we don't have to ask for it? Or could there be cushions on the chairs? And could there maybe be some reading material or some colouring material rather than leaflets about psychosis? Because actually that's provoking my anxiety. And all of this little bits of feedback are the blind spots when people create services without lived experience that only people with lived experience can share. And you might think some of it is common sense, but it's not. And that's where the expert word comes in, because these expertise are something that can only be gained by going through the services. So experts by experience are what we call the people in our lived experience network that go into workshops and go into meetings alongside, we call them statutory services, so the NHS or the council, to share their expertise in what it's like to experience the service they're providing.
For example, someone's put on a waiting list. Like, great, okay, I've been put on a waiting list. So as far as they're concerned, that person's been put on a waiting list. They know they're on a waiting list. Job done. It's not if you're waiting for 9-10 months and during that time you don't hear anything. That is an incredibly anxious time. And something we've said is you need to remind us that you know we're on a waiting list so that we know we're still on a waiting list. Because if we aren't being reminded by that, we just feel abandoned. We feel like you've forgotten about us and you've just pushed us down the stream, and that's the last we're ever going to hear from you. Because we don't know when you're going to get in touch to say, you're at the top of the waiting list.
Yeah. There can be really simple things that are experts by experience. And one of the things that I've drawn out so far from working with people with lived experience and that I've shared with the NHS multiple times is it's not just about doing, it's about how you do it. And I think we're working on a project called Trusted Assessments, but a big part of that is understanding that it's not just sending a letter, not just sending a summary, but it's what those words say and how those words make someone feel. At least historically, often letters and communications have been quite clinical. Your appointment is at this time, you are still on the waiting list. When actually just a softening of that language, we really appreciate your patience. We really appreciate that this is a stressful time for you. Here is some signposting to other services that can support you in this time, can make all the difference. Because although, again, it's bread and butter for statutory services to be sending out letters, that's someone's life that's being affected by the letter dropping through their postbox. And if that letter makes them feel a little bit safer, that will change the trajectory possibly of their day, possibly of their week, possibly of their months waiting to be seen. And it's mad to think that something, again, so small could have such a big impact, but it really does. And again, blind spot of the people delivering the service, but something that lived experience people can pick up like that. And again, I'm humbled every day by how experts by experience can pull out and draw out the practicalities of a service, like how it's actually going to run, how it's actually going to feel for someone on the other end of it, and make those little changes and make those little suggestions that will, in the future, mean that someone receives that service or receives a communication in a more positive way. And it's slow. We don't see progress at 1,000,000 miles per hour, but when those things do change, it can make a big impact. It's like a bit like the words around safety and risk.
Yeah, I can give an example of, there are things that have changed over the time that we've been doing it the last 2.5 years, but something that one of our experts by experience is particularly proud of is when we first started, the crisis line, I think it was the out of hours crisis line, one of the numbers you'd call and it would go to an external service somewhere completely different in the UK, not in Cornwall. And you would talk to people who had no idea where you were from, what you were talking about, what places you were talking about.
Couldn't access your records.
Whereas when we had a workshop with the NHS, they heard that and they realised that isn't working. And they were spending a lot of money and they thought, let's scrap that and bring it back to the local crisis team.
Yeah.
So now when you phone the crisis line, you will actually speak to the local crisis team. You won't be sent to speak to someone who's no idea what you're talking about, where you're from. And it's much more, hopefully, personable to the people who are phoning.
And it can link into the other services then, because that crisis service sits within a greater mental health service that we have. And that's all from lived experience feedback.
Exactly. Direct feedback from one of the experts by experience, telling them what the issue was and then taking it on board.
Very bravely telling them and very directly telling them. I admire all the time the way that our experts by experience, and I imagine it's from some of the training and practice, but learn to advocate so well. And sometimes I'm like, I need a bit more of that in my life, a little bit more boundaries, a little bit more ability to say, actually, this isn't acceptable or this experience wasn't good. So for the people pleasers among us, it's great practice being someone who offers lived experience perspectives or being an expert by experience, because it gets us to practice those uncomfortable moments of giving someone that feedback that maybe they don't want to hear, but that is vitally important in changing the system.
Jo, you've been into the show previously a little while back. What's actually happened since you came in? Because I believe you've made some progress with some of the projects.
Yeah, we've had quite a few projects since then. Last summer we had one with someone who's running training for trainee psychiatrists. So we brought in a group of experts by experience who discussed various scenarios that the trainee psychiatrists were going to be looking at. And what was going to happen was an actor was going to act out a simulation of what that was like, but the person who's running it wanted the perspective from people with lived experience to see what it was genuinely like and to make sure that he got the scenario correct. It was really well done. There wasn't many of us in the room, there's about 5 of us, but everybody felt like it was a very good workshop, and he was really good at getting back to us, updating about how it was used and feeding back how the training was done. Another one we ran last autumn was looking at assessments into the community mental health team for people who are neurodivergent. We had 3 experts by experience come along to that, and someone from the community mental health team to talk to the experts by experience about their needs when it comes to assessments, how to make them more accessible, what they might need in a pre-brief before the assessment even happens, how assessments could be more accessible. And because it was a small group of us, the time was taken to actually discuss it properly, and each individual, the experts by experience, had the time to say what they needed. So the feedback from the experts by experience was that worked really well. And then we had one at the end of the year last year looking at medication reviews and the information that people have when they're prescribed on long-term medication. And that had a really good discussion. There was 4 clinicians were in the room along with 5 experts by experience. And it was a really good discussion, and they've gone away and they're hoping to put together a little video based on what the experts by experience said as well. So that's really positive, and hopefully something really useful will come out of that. And then probably one of the best workshops we've done happened in February when we were working with what was called SPOA, Single Point of Access. So the Single Point of Access team are the people who assess people going into the community mental health team and other mental health services. So the idea of that workshop was to look at what the name could be and to look at what the team do, what they provide people when they're coming into services. And we came up with a name. That was all very democratic. It was good. Everyone had the chance to discuss it and come up with it as individual teams. And then there was a vote online afterwards, and they shared that with the wider team. So that was good. And I think what worked really well about that workshop was the person who was running it has worked with us quite a bit over the last 2.5 years. And she's really taken on board when we give her feedback on what has and hasn't worked in workshops, because we always make sure we talk to the experts by experience about how they found the workshop, what they found positive, what they found negative, and then feed that back to the NHS and try to improve them each time. And the team themselves, they were very willing to bring in the experts by experience and work with them. They spread out, so it wasn't just people from the same team on each table. They were willing to separate themselves as well, and the experts by experience have now done it enough that they were comfortable not being on a table with other experts by experience. They were happy to spread out in quite a big room as well, and it felt like a really collaborative process, and it was a really good workshop.
Now might be the time to kind of share what we do and toot our own horns a little bit. We have this lived experience network, so these group of people, they can be anyone from the communities across Cornwall who have signed up and said, I want to use my experience to change the face of mental health care in Cornwall. Then what we do as the people who both have lived experience ourselves, but also coordinate that, is to facilitate that culture change within the NHS, so that when they're developing projects and developing services, they think, all these ideas are great, but what we really need is the perspective of people who actually use the services. And that's where we come in to facilitate and support that. So it's less simple than you might think of just putting people in a room with the NHS and just saying, talk it out. It comes with a lot, as you can imagine, and I'm sure we have experience of. If you have experience of mental health conditions, not all of your memories will be super positive, and sharing that experience, not all of which will be positive, can be really challenging. And so we support people by providing training, providing the option of counselling support, and providing remuneration, so support to get there and support to break down the barriers of being involved in this work, so that they can be sitting in that room with confidence and have one of us two giving them the thumbs up and cheering and supporting, and also creating boundaries and structures so that if things do push into areas they don't want to discuss, we're also there to support them to say, that's probably enough for today. We don't have to do that very often, I don't think, but it's important having that structure to support people in sharing and to value those people. And so that's where we come in. So as a network, they kind of sit outside there, and then there's us two cheering them on and providing kind of the path and the pavement for them to follow to get involved in this work. And I think we're doing a good job. We're getting there. There's some changes happening. And I'm quite excited about what the future holds. As the NHS starts to listen more to lived experience, they see its value, and the more they want it included in projects. And that is showing, I think. They're really starting to think about those moments of lived experience and how they can be brought into projects.
It sounds like it's a really positive experience for people that are involved in this project.
There's definitely some benefits of being involved in the work. It provides training, it provides new skill sets, it puts almost a cathartic experience or like a kind of liberating context of having maybe had a negative experience with a service to then being able to go in and express what happened and really feel like you can be part of the change so that never happens to someone again. And these are all amazing things. It also provides a little bit of community, a little bit of touch point with people who may have very different views or opinions to you, but you can all start to kind of have a shared purpose of expressing yourselves and influencing change in the NHS.
We tried to set up a process that we give the experts by experience at least 4 weeks notice, because we acknowledge that some of them are working. So if they want to take part, they need to have the time to be able to take time off work. So that's why we do ask for 4 weeks notice to be able to send them an opportunity advert, as we call them. I send an email basically explaining what the workshop's going to be, where it's going to be, when it's happening, how much they'll be paid for it. So that's the sort of gold star. Yes,
standard.
We have 4 weeks notice. Sometimes we don't get as much notice as that, so that's a bit more challenging. Probably more for us than for the experts by experience themselves. But there are times when people have said, I'd love to do that, but unfortunately I can't do it because I'm not available. And the other thing is just little things, and this is, for me, for the last 2.5 years, I've also been taking part in what they call community of practices. Mm-hmm. So National Mind have a community of practice where they get all the local minds together who do lived experience work and talk about what it's like. And it's reassuring to find out that their experiences are very similar to ours. They have problems, and some of them have those challenges within their own local minds, not even with working with someone else. So when you're working with an external organisation, it just is a little bit extra layer of admin. It's all very similar problems, and there's a term called co-production, which we haven't really mentioned because that's the gold standard. When you're working with people with lived experience, it's about best practice of how to set up those workshops to make it as comfortable as possible. And sometimes it's the little things. Mm-hmm. And this is why we get feedback at the end of workshops saying what worked, what didn't work, to remind the people we're working with, this was really good, but actually it's the little thing of you didn't set a time to have a break.
Yeah.
And when you're in a 2-3 hour workshop, there needs to be a break at some point, because people become uneasy, they become uncomfortable about when they're going to have the chance to pop out for a break.
What we create is that environment and that setting, isn't it, of actually making sure that access to toilets is right. There's snacks and teas to keep us boosted. There's breaks when people need them. And it is all of that kind of, it seems simple, just put some people with lived experience in a room with the NHS. And that is not how it works. Again, I will credit Joe with this. He is amazing at knowing and checking in with what people really need. And it is those little things. Noise is a classic one of, actually often offices or rooms can have lots of busy things going on, and for anyone with neurodiversity or just generally a slightly busy, anxious mind, that can be really challenging. So quiet spaces is another thing that we try and ensure all people with lived experience have, in order that they can share their stories confidently and clearly without having to overcome additional challenges that they really don't need. One of the examples of how lived experience influences the NHS and how our experts by experience enter meetings and workshops and can create change within the NHS is actually a kind of subtle example, and it's around the use of language. And so we had an expert by experience who was brought in to a workshop to discuss stuff to do with risk. So risk is a big word in mental health, and it's something that's really important for clinicians to assess. But the word risk in itself kind of was expressed as feeling like a accusation or a weight on that person, like you are a risk. And they described how much nicer it felt and how much of a shift in the perspective there was, and actually the culture and the thinking around people if you use the word safety. So we want to make sure you're safe, rather than we want to assess your risk. And that just simple change of language kind of trickled down and trickled on. And now in many meetings with the NHS, I hear people correct each other, risk, safety. Should we use the word safety rather than risk? And that is something that, again, seems so simple, but makes a monumental change when you're thinking of how care is received and experienced. And that's just an expert by experience reflecting on that and translating that. And then it disseminates like that beautiful butterfly effect through different meetings and different workshops. And it's an example I've been given multiple times by the NHS back to me, like that was a really good bit of reflection. So it's lovely to see how an expert by experience can come into the work and feel safe to express that doesn't sound right, that doesn't feel right to me, and be listened to and heard, and changes happen.
So you've given us lots of examples of the experts by experience and what they do. So if anybody's listening and they're interested, is there something that they can get involved with?
That is a great question, and I'm actually really excited to share that we are recruiting for Experts by Experience. Recruiting sounds like a very official word, but we are looking for people to join our lived experience network, to sign up and to get trained up to do the expert by experience role, to go into workshops and meetings with the NHS or the council and services and share their story and their perspective about what really works when it comes to mental health care and mental health support. So if people want to do that, they can go to the Mind website, find our expert by experience or lived experience network page, and there should be a little button there that says apply. If they have any trouble finding that button, then they can just email via the main contact page and they'll be pointed in the right direction. But yeah, it's a really exciting thing for me, the first time I'm doing it, because I'm fairly new to the role, so it would be great to hear from people. I'd also love to say that when thinking about whether you are an expert by experience, it's not just about whether you think you have enough or sufficient experience with the mental health system to give an opinion on it. Everyone who has sought support with their mental health is someone who has expertise in seeking support, and it may not be you, but it may be a family member or another member of staff, or even if you work in the NHS, it might be yourself or a colleague who you could think, actually, they have a lot of experience, or they have had an experience that could be worthwhile sharing. And we'll give them the support and kind of the path to share that. So I think it's sometimes hard to identify as an expert. I definitely would find that stat tricky with me. I'm like, am I an expert in anything? I think I don't really know anything at all. But anyone with experience of living with a mental health condition or seeking support with their mental health is an expert by experience.
It's been really interesting to learn about the Lived Experience Network.
Thank you.
Jo and Rose, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.
Hello, my name's Abi and I'm back in the studio with Gaelle again today. Hello, Gaelle.
Hi.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about the resources that we find useful when we're struggling in life, such as books and podcasts. So, Gaelle, what do you find useful?
So anything can be useful if you get stuck somewhere. It's more a fact of being able to put your struggle into words, into a question. I mean, you go into Google and then you find answers, and there's so much out there. There's stuff on Instagram, on Google, libraries everywhere.
It's quite overwhelming, isn't it?
It is. What I find is that you find resources when you need them. So when you start having the ability of asking questions about what your struggle is, then you start asking the right questions. And then somehow when you ask the right questions, you find the right answers, if that makes sense. So some people just will do you absolutely need to read this because this is the hottest book right now. And you know, they have the bestsellers list. And I really don't like bestsellers list. I'm a rebel. So the more you ask me to do something, the less I will do it. And the more someone talks about something, the more it puts me off as well. It feels like this maybe a lack of respect for my needs, that it's talking about everyone else but it's not talking about me. And I'm not buying or reading a book because it's been a bestseller. I read it because I read the back page or something online, and it starts answering some of the questions that I have.
So what would you say is your go-to resource?
So I have included some in my courses that I think they're just so good. So one of them is called The Work from Byron Katie. So that's quite old actually, it's decades old, but she basically went through a really, really hard time, rock bottom. She had 5 kids and she took herself out of a situation she was in, and she started asking questions. And funny enough, she came up with something that is called The Works, and it's a set of questions. And very often it has a different number of questions according to where you look at. But if you look at her website, it's got 6 questions. When I Googled it earlier, it had only 4. And it's basically how you question the beliefs or the thoughts that you have in your mind. So I'll give you an example. She will say, well, can you state something that you strongly believe? And then she will say, well, is it true? And you start having to justify why you think that. And then she'll ask, how can you be absolutely sure that it's true? how do you know it's true? And then how do you react when you have that thought? So what's your body language? What are the emotions traveling through your body? What does it stop you to do as well? It's not just the things you do, but it's also the things you don't do because you believe that maybe you are rubbish at something, for example. And then the last question is, who would you be without that thought? If you never have that thought again, what would you do? What would you be able to do that you have stopped yourself doing? And I think this is really, really powerful. There's another one called the turnaround, and it's basically when you have a conversation, it could start from you or it could start from a friend, that they're coming up with a really strong statement. And very often it comes from limiting beliefs that we have accumulated from childhood, from education, from someone well-intentioned in our family that is always coming up with something. Don't do this. Don't be like that. And then you tend to assimilate that as, well, you're not allowed to be that because it's wrong somehow. And very often when people come up with something that strong, it's because of something they've accumulated like that. And if you have a friend that is picking on you for something in particular, very often it's about them, it's not about you. So I find her questions really, really helpful because you can untangle a situation or something you really strongly believe in, and you might discover that the reasons why you believe in it have nothing to do with you. You've just taken that from someone else maybe.
Yeah, I think I've come across Byron Katie before, and I think that you say that the question about, is it really true?
Yeah.
I think it's that questioning there is quite interesting, isn't it? It almost helps you to take a step back.
Yeah, I think it would be the same thing with people, influencers out there, or people talking about the news. And there's this very insidious way of talking at the moment where there's always a panel of experts and they all know everything about everything. But there's no one asking the question, well, is it true? How do you know it's true? And then we don't know how much of a bias these people have. And is that a strong opinion because they belong to a group that also has these strong opinions?
I think that's a really interesting point about influencers. So do you think that places such as Instagram can be helpful?
I think they can. The danger of Instagram at the moment is if you click on something because you get slightly interested in something, the algorithm are just so powerful that it picks up on it straight away, and then your feed fills up with that. And that's okay if you're looking for resources and something helpful, but equally if you're looking for something that is quite dark, because the words you're choosing about the struggle rather than the solution, then the algorithm will pick up about that just as much, and then everything that you will see over people in the same struggle, and what you need is something different to that. So I think that these platforms are putting too much emphasis onto what have you been looking at, and let's give you plenty of that, plenty more. And I think that's overwhelming because it's not giving you the chance encounters, the things you would have discovered had you not looked for it. And now it's all about the stuff that you search. So if you have already a strong opinion on that, it could reinforce it. As a platform, it's noisy, it's got videos on everything, it's got music on everything, and something that was quiet before, it had a lot of photos and stills. So a still is just something that doesn't move, and in a world where everything moves around us, finding that stillness is really important, and then replacing it by all of this noise and movement over time. Sometimes you need that stillness back. So I'm spending a lot less time on that, because even though there's a lot of really good stuff, there's almost too much good stuff. And you just take it for a couple of minutes and just go away and then digest that.
So do you think we're better to look for resources that are from people who are qualified, who are experts because they are qualified, for example, like psychologists, people who've studied these areas, rather than, like we were saying, about the influencers?
So that makes me think about that person called Mel Robbins. She's really now famous. She has gone through so much in her life, and what she does is she goes and asks questions, and she's talked to a lot of experts. So she's done the two of them. She's talked about her personal life, and she's talked with the experts about solutions and things that she wanted answers for. And I think the thing with experts and psychologists and all of that, sometimes some of them can't relate. They sit in a very professional, very clinical way. And then you need to hear voices from people that have been there. It happened to them, because you will find in all of these resources that are around us that you need a balance between some professional advice but also some voices from life.
Talking about voices from life, actually, we were talking earlier on about conversations and the conversations we have when we're struggling. And you made some really interesting points. So I wonder if you could share that, please.
Yeah. See, sometimes I go for a walk with some friends and then we'll have the usual conversations. And it's a case of, how's work? How's life? And it's just, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about what's currently going on in my head, especially if it's taken already half of the week for me to deal with, where I got quite upset about it. And actually it keeps me there, but in a way it comes from a good place. It comes from the fact that they haven't seen me for a while and they just want to know what's going on in my life. However, there's a part of me that wishes that the conversations were completely different. I don't know if it's me being too ideologist, but I just wish that we could talk about just happy stuff or dreams or the things that we wish we could do, and just for a moment just leave our life behind and then just talk about everything but that. And I think what you were trying to say with the point I made is that when we're having these conversations about the struggles, we talk about the struggle itself, not the solution. And it's only when you start asking questions, and the questions you ask about finding solutions are not the ones that you have with friends. However, saying that, I've got one that I discovered recently. She was in ADHD, and she's really into Mel Robbins, actually. She's raving about her, and Mel comes up with content a lot. She's got podcasts, she's got books, she's very prolific. Yes, prolific, that's what we're looking for. And I can have conversations with her about that, which are really, really interesting, because what we're talking about, I've discovered this is really helpful, and why don't you try it? But we have these conversations where we can move away from the struggle and into the solution territory. I don't think everyone can do that, though. Sometimes people are just so much into a struggle that they need to unload before we can start.
Perhaps there's a bit of a conversational habit of that, isn't there? We're quite used to that sort of pattern of conversation, and it's quite different to think of it in a different way sometimes.
I think people are just not very imaginative. And I think also, if you live in a world where you get a lot of repetition and where all the questions are always the same, then you tend to do the same and you don't even realize you're doing it. I think it only comes to a point when maybe you're at breaking point, or you've had enough of that, or you moved away from the struggle and you are so much into, I found solutions, I'm really excited about that, and you leave the struggle behind, that you can have these conversations. But not everyone is at that stage at the same time. So it's a bit of nudging, it's a bit of questioning, it's a bit of, but I might have something that I could recommend for that. But sometimes the conversation is just about listening to that person so they feel heard. It might not work for you, but it works for them. And if they don't get heard very often, if that's what you give them, then at least you feel better for that by the end of the conversation.
So you were saying about Mel Robbins, is there one thing that's really stayed with you?
Yeah, there's one that sounds really, really funny. It's called jerk or chicken. It's not about cooking, it's not a recipe, but it's an exercise about just defining something that you haven't been able to, that you wish you could do. So it's just maybe a project you've put on hold, or a dream that you always thought about but you had cold feet about it. So just write that down. And then basically the jerk is self-sabotage and chicken is fear. So looking at the reasons why you're not doing that thing that really matters to you, where is it based? And if it's based in fear, then maybe you can have little stepping stones into building your courage. And then if it's about, you always wanted to sing, well, why don't you join a choir? Why don't you join a group where you learn about it? Why don't you watch some online? There's lots of little steps that you can build up if it's fear. If it's self-sabotage, it could be that you are being your worst enemy by filling in your time too much with other stuff. You're putting it off. You think that there's a reason, but actually when you go into, is this true? And why haven't you done it yet? Precisely, what has been holding you on? And then, actually, I've been busy. Busy with what? And then you start making a list of what you've been busy with what, and you think, actually I could have had that time for myself doing something I really love. And we have this habit these days of filling our time with stuff. And I really like that exercise, because sometimes it's just people have dreams. And we don't talk about dreams anymore. We're talking about a lot of the things that are going wrong around us. But there's very little space for the dreams that we have inside. And I think we need to reenact some of that. So if someone comes up with, I always wanted to do this, X, Y, and Z, say, okay, well, what is it that is stopping you? And it might take quite a bit of a conversation to get to the real reasons. But it's just there's a process in the book saying, stop saying you're fine, that will describe how to do it. And all these kind of reasons, I shall put them into the jerk or chicken column. And I think because it's such a funny way of calling something, because she has such a forward way of describing things, people can relate to that. It's not about clever words. It's not about psychology or neuroscience. It's just very basic. Are you being a jerk or are you being a chicken? And okay, let's work together and let's make your dream
Sort of lightens up a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. And I think sometimes she's really funny. She's very, very light. And she doesn't do it in a way that doesn't respect other people. She does it in a way that says, I've been there. And you know what? I use these words for myself. So if I use them for myself, that's okay. If I can live with it, surely you can live with it. And then if not, just get used to me, because I'm not going to change how I'm talking anyway. And I like that about her, because she's not about appearances. She feels very true. She feels very genuine. And I think she really cares for people.
Well, that all sounded a little bit too familiar for me. So I'm off to go and read a little bit of Mel Robbins. Thank you, Gaelle.
Happy reading.
A space to speak your mind.
That's all for today's programme.
If you missed anything, you can download the podcast now on Apple, Spotify and Amazon Podcast.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear the new episode when it comes out, or listen back to any of our previous programmes.
For support and more information for better mental health, visit cornwallmind.org
or call the Mind helpline during office hours on 0300 123 3393.
Or call the NHS Crisis Hotline on 111 and then press the option 2.
And you can call the Samaritans anytime for free on 116 123.
And you can find out more about the show if you follow Cornwall Mind on Facebook or Instagram, or on their website cornwallmind.org.
If you'd like to be part of the show, you can get in contact. Email aspacetospeakyourmind@gmail.com.
A space to speak your mind with Cornwall Mind.